Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you have ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. I am your host, Pattie Porter. My guest hosts, Dina Zametta and Stephen Kotev, along with our guest experts, will share our experiences, raise your awareness, and give you food for thought. We will share with you problem-solving strategies no matter what your situation is. At work, with neighbors or friends, family, and as partners. Tune in or join in the conversation every Tuesday evening. Well, welcome, listeners, to our new Conflict Chat program. This is Pattie Porter, founder of the Texas Conflict Coach online radio program. So what is the new Conflict Chat program? Well, we started in January, the last Tuesday of every month. We are going to highlight conflict-related topics that the ordinary person deals with in their daily lives, things we see or hear in the news or maybe we experienced ourselves. More importantly, you have the opportunity to call in and ask your question with conflict management experts who are mediators, conflict coaches, and facilitators on how to think differently, analyze, or steps to resolve your situation. So, for example, if you're in a current conflict with your friend, maybe you're avoiding a conversation with a family member or dwelling on a past conflict with your boss or coworker, we will provide you with conflict coaching guidance. Now, you can engage with us in three primary ways. Call now, 347-324-3591, and press the 1 key so that we know you want to speak with us. Or you can enter the chat room. We have that open now at blogtalkradio.com/Texas-conflict-coach or tweet us at TXConflictCoach and follow our Twitter feed using the hashtag ConflictChat. So in tonight's Conflict Chat, I have with me guest host Tracy Culbreath King and Abigail McManus, who's also an apprentice for the Texas Conflict Coach, and you can learn more about them and their backgrounds at TexasConflictCoach.com. So Abby and Tracy, I'm so glad we're having this conversation tonight.
Me too.
Thank you, Pattie. I'm excited.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so, last month we had a really interesting set of circumstances that we talked about. It was really, it was a lot of fun. We had a blizzard going on and all kinds of conflict that comes up with that. But we picked out some new situations that we thought we would bring up until we get live callers who call in. And, again, this is a new platform and a format for folks, so we're ready. So we were calling the news, and I'm sure Tracy and Abby also selected some things that was really appealing to them. But one of the ones I chose was a Dear Abby letter, actually. And the situation is that the wife wants the concert ticket payment. So what does that mean? So you ever been in this situation, listeners? You go and you make a purchase for a friend. Let's say you're going to go to a concert together. You're going to go stay at a hotel together. You're going to, maybe you purchased, pizza because you're having a party. And so there's these set of expectations or assumptions that, hey, I bought the concert ticket. You're going to pay me now because I just bought it. So basically the lady was saying, the wife was saying, look, I purchased these concert tickets online. When should I expect reimbursement? And she says, hey, I paid for it. It's on my credit card, so shouldn't. There comes that should word, the should, S-H-O-U-L-D, is a value that it imposed. Shouldn't they be paying me in advance? Shouldn't they be paying me now? Or does the friend says, well, hey, you don't have the tickets yet, so as soon as you give me the tickets, I'll give you the money. So causing a lot of angst there. Have you ever had that situation happen to y'all?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, because, when we use should language, there's some type of value or needs that come in for this person. So what do you think for yourself or even the scenario in Dear Abby column about the wife, what do you think maybe some of her own values or needs are that are coming into play for her on this situation?
deeper values could be just mutual respect. I did this with the assumption that you would pay me back, and this is important, and I'm seeing the charges on my card, and I haven't received anything from you. So what is that? What does that mean? Are you appreciative of what I've done, or things like that?
Mhm. And I very much agree with that too. She values, her money and her time, and I think in the article it even says there's not a discussion about when the person's supposed to pay you back, but at the same time, I think in most situations, you think the person will pay you back, maybe at least when you give them the ticket. But I know there's always this uneven ground there. But I kind of agree with Tracy. It comes down to a respect thing and appreciative thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember my husband. He's going to Robert. He's going to England in April, and he's going to meet up with a whole bunch of guys. And they bought all these concerts. Literally, they bought all these concert tickets. A rare concert that hasn't happened since 1983. And so they all agreed to divvy up different responsibilities and who's buying tickets, who's purchasing pre-advance, the hotel, and all those kinds of things. And that can end up being costly when you have about 10 people in your group. And so they all agreed, okay, you get this set of tickets, and we'll get the lodging room over here, and then it gets paid in advance. And your credit card's racking up the interest charges, and I totally trust him and everything, but I don't know any of these guys. And so I said to him, so have they paid you yet? He goes, oh, no, not yet. I'm sure they will anytime soon now. Now we're talking about 6 weeks ago now, and it's going to be April. So every week or so. Have they paid you yet? And I could feel him feeling the tension of, I really trust them. They're going to pay me. I think part of my anxiety is, okay, so we're racking up some interest. Shouldn't they be paying you right now that you bought the tickets? And so I had these shoulds, coming out of my head, which is basically a value. It's a value very similar to what you just talked about, the value of respecting money, recognizing we might be paying extra interest on the credit card. Also a little bit of a fear factor too, are they going to really pay us? Are we going to get stiffed for extra tickets or lodging? What happens if they no-show? Did they buy their plane ticket? Because we're stuck with that. And so there's this little fear factor and a little trust that goes with that too. Now, you said y'all had that same experience as well, right?
Right.
And I think there's always, like you just said, about a fear factor, because I know I don't like to owe people money, so I pay almost immediately. And I think there's a lot of cases that I've been in where I assume that somebody maybe feels the same way as I do, has the same value of they don't want to have to be paying someone back. But I think it's also the fear of having that uncomfortable conversation about money and having to ask them to pay you back, even though you think they should just do that automatically. It always makes me a little uncomfortable to have to come down to actually asking the person, hey, are you going to pay me back? And I've run into that situation a couple of times, and that's very uncomfortable.
I agree. There's definitely a sense of uncomfort when it comes to having conversations about money, regardless of who that conversation is with. Whether it's with a spouse or a friend or a coworker, there's always that anxiety, at least for me, that I feel that money brings up.
So let me just clarify, is the anxiety about the conversation of money after the purchase or before the purchase?
So for me, the anxiety is I had it both ways recently. Recently I was planning a party, which involved me to travel and plan with several other people. And so I was the one that purchased a hotel room with the expectation that others would chip in for it, but me being the only one out of town, there was that anxiety of, okay, so I'm doing this from here in Maryland while everyone else is in a different state, so how am I going to get this money, and are they going to really give it to me when I get there? So there was that anxiety when I first did it, and then there was anxiety when I actually got there and was like, okay, we're getting ready to check into the hotel. Where's the money? So I think it's just uncomfortable. And there's also that trust component, because for me in that situation, I didn't know some of the women that we were getting the hotel with. So there was that unknown element of, I don't know if I can trust you, I'm not really familiar with you, and how I should have difficult conversations so we can move this forward.
And I agree with Tracy. There's like a certain level of anxiety just because if you are offering to pay for the money, I mean, I've been burned a number of times where you will pay for something and you kind of get locked in and then people bail on you, and then I've been in situations where they don't even offer to pay even though they told you that they were going to, and then you get stuck eating that money. So I've kind of learned more or less in the earlier stages just to be like, all right, well, I'll purchase everyone's tickets, but everyone has to give me the money ahead of time. And that's helped a lot. But then there's also that just money in general, I think, makes things uncomfortable to some extent because there's this anxiety of then you're like badgering people and like in Tracy's situation where you don't know other people, then you feel like you're like racing down trying to collect money from people, and it can just get really uncomfortable, I think.
Yeah. So I think one of the things in terms of a strategy, because money, whether it's, money in a relationship, money in a friendship, money with coworkers, is always prime for conflict. And I think one of the biggest strategies, and dear Abby even mentioned to her, mentioned in the letter, the biggest mistake that you made, the wife, was to not set expectations up front. And so that conversation, right, around expectations of, okay, I'm going to purchase these tickets. Before I purchase these tickets, like you said, Abby, I need the money up front. If you don't meet the deadline, we're going to purchase the tickets without you. So just being very clear and setting not only expectations but clear boundaries. What will happen if you don't follow through with your portion of the money, right? And so it's what are those boundaries? And a lot has to do with how much of a trusting relationship you have with that person, and if it's a stranger, definitely set boundaries around that. Other strategies you can think of in terms of this kind of issue that's very common to people?
I thought her strategy was excellent when I was reading the article because, I mean, I as I said, I do that a lot now. I'll kind of set the boundaries, but I really couldn't think of any other strategy because I think that's really important to set expectations prior to even doing it, even taking that on. Because that's how you get into more conflicts if you don't. So I really liked her strategy.
I agree. I think it's really important to have those conversations up front, and then that way if something does happen, at least you can refer back to them and say, on this date we had this understanding, and I'm not sure what changed. Can you help me understand so we can move forward?
Yes, and so even though the conversation around money might be very uncomfortable, and really be thinking about why is that uncomfortable for you, so that you don't find yourself, because it will be even more excruciating for you after the fact when you find yourself in this dilemma, and then all of those shoulds and all those values and everything comes into play, and then we judge people that have maybe a different value set than we have around money. So be thinking about, if you really are having a lot of anxiety, listeners, around money conversations, why is that? What is the anxiety about? What is that fear factor for you when you're having anxiety about talking about money and setting expectations? That clear communication, is going to be really important. We do have another situation. Tracy, you found an interesting story. Why don't you give us a little synopsis about that?
I did. The story that I found was the lessons we can learn from the man who skipped work for 6 years. And the article, I know, you hear the title and you think, how did this happen? But how did this happen? The article touches on the lack of traditional communication and how connecting with one another in an office setting has changed. It begins with an employee in Spain who is being honored for an award for a loyalty service. And when they go to reach out to the employee to present him with the award, they learn that he hasn't been in the office for 6 years. They're checking with payroll, they're calling him, they're kind of checking his email, they're going through all these things to see what happened to this guy. And it turns out that the employee's response for not being present at work for 6 years was because of workplace bullying, and that's what kept him out of the office.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to you and to Abby is, and to the listeners is, what type of workplace behaviors have you experienced that have made you want to call into work or leave work early or try to duck out of a meeting?
I've been in a situation on multiple occasions where I feel like I'm carrying a lot of the workload, or I have other members of my team that are slacking, and that stresses me out, and then I find myself, I just want to take a day off or leave a meeting or leave work early, just because that alone can stress me out, and then I find that it's difficult for me to want to stay there and put forth all my effort. So it was interesting when I read this article, because it's my husband works remotely, and he doesn't go into work for long periods of time, but he can phone in. But when I was reading it, I was like, he actually didn't go to work for 3 months at a time over the summer. I was like, but I mean, at least he is showing his face. But it was just, when I was reading it, that's what I kept thinking about. So I went off topic.
Yeah, it's really funny, I'm sorry, Trace, go ahead.
Go ahead, Pattie. Go ahead.
Well, when you were asking that question, first of all, I'm thinking of this guy who says he was being bullied at work. But it's one thing to say, okay, I'm not coming into work, for the next, month or 2 weeks or whatever, but to continue to do that for 6 years and in his own way was abusing the system and abusing the company, knowing he was not working. So it's interesting that he was using that as an excuse and yet demonstrating the same behaviors that totally was taking advantage of the company, not communicating with the company that he was being bullied. So to me, I really question, was there really workplace bullying, and why did he not reach out to folks to talk to them about it and then continue to abuse the system himself? But, your question back to what would cause me or even some of the clients I've coached to want to skip work or just not go back, and when people feel like they're being humiliated, embarrassed, there's lots of sarcasm and civility, things like, feeling demeaned, feeling like you're not worth it, feeling like you have no value, especially if it's just ongoing every day, and you feel like you just can't get out of that barrage of things that might be happening. It's just like, who wants to work in that kind of environment? That makes it very, very difficult.
Some of the experiences that I've had around the workplace bullying is I've had instances where I've worked really hard on a project, and I've worked hard with other people as a team, but one person takes credit for all of the work. And for me, that is really deflating, and it's really hard for me to get back from that. And so that's one of those things where when it happens, I do want to go home early, and get some cake or go get some ice cream and just kind of go back to a happy place and figure out what my next move is.
Well, I mean, it's one thing, it's good that you take some space, like you said, and we all have our vices, right? Yours is probably ice cream, right? I love chocolate. But it's good that we've taken that space, to think through what the next move versus reacting, right? Last time we talked about triggers and reacting in a very defensive way or aggressive way ourselves. And so that strategy of taking that space to really think through what am I really understanding about the situation and what is my next move, right?
Right. And I think an important component of it, too, is also standing up for yourself, right? So you need that space to figure out how you want to move forward so you can have that conversation, regardless of how difficult it is, about the work that was done. And it needs to be a thoughtful conversation. You want it to be professional and respectful to the other person, but you also want to say, I disagreed with what's happened, and here's why, and this is how I was impacted.
So, I'm just pausing in the sense of how, a lot of us, we find ourselves in these situations, especially at work, that we feel that we're alone a lot of times. And the thing is that we really aren't alone. I think sometimes employees feel scared to reach out for help They might confide in an employee or coworker, but sometimes that confiding turns into a lot of gossip and hearsay, and that's not very productive or healthy. But really knowing where can you go for help, when you feel that you're having these kinds of issues, because when we hold on to them, right, we know that they fester. And for this guy, I guess he was festering for 6 years that he didn't show up to work. What's really sad is that the company didn't even realize that he wasn't there at work and he's still getting paid. So there was a huge gap of miscommunication, a huge like Grand Canyon gap problem, in their system. So that communication and reaching out and knowing where you can get support without fear of retaliation is always really important. Before we go any further, let me just let folks know that that you are listening to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program, and we do invite you to call in. So if you're listening through the computer and you want to call in and talk with us about maybe your own personal situation, it's 347-324-3591. We also have the chat room open, or if you're on our Twitter feed, just use Conflict Chat, #Conflict Chat, to pose your question or comment. So anything further about that? Because, Abby, you also had found something that right in your own backyard that you wanted to talk about.
The one last thing I wanted to say about Tracy's article, I also think majority of the conversations that I have with my coworkers is done through email. It's very rare that we really sit down and have conversations with each other, and I think that's just becoming so common now that I do think that cuts down on a lot of the gossiping, but it does lead you to not have face-to-face conversation, and that's completely changing the way I think the workforce is handled and how things are done, just because everything's done through email. So you really have to step up your email communication skills and being able to convey messages, because people don't have that face-to-face interaction.
Mm-hmm.
So. Absolutely. And because that face-to-face interaction is lacking, you may be less inclined to go reach out to your supervisor if you're being bullied. So you may do the silent suffering. You may not confide in anyone because you don't feel comfortable enough to having that conversation with them in person, and you don't know how to craft that conversation in email.
Exactly.
It's interesting that you just mentioned that, Tracy, because we've had a guest on the show in the past, and they're actually getting ready to launch their brand new technology online platform to work specifically with employees who are experiencing some kind of either bullying behaviors or abrasive behavior. So that technology and talking through this platform gives this sense of safety that, I need to bring it the issue, and it's called Brave, B-R-A-V. I think y'all have heard of them, and maybe even helped with some of the hosting of Brave. But they're actually going to be launching their online platform that's geared toward employees and staff who are experiencing these kinds of, either bullying or abrasive or even incivility types of behaviors and issues, and gives them a way to start to talk, to be heard and understood. And so stay tuned, more listeners, about that. But people are trying to figure out how can we help these employees with communication, especially with technology. So on one hand, it's like we're talking less, we're not seeing each other, we're not making those connections, and yet how do we capitalize on using social media or online platforms or technology to communicate in a different way? So definitely pluses and minuses, regarding that. So.
The article I actually brought, I found, was that Baltimore City is launching a mediation program for citizen complaints against police, and it's going to be brought in to kind of help improve police-community relations, and it will allow police officers to be face-to-face with the people who file complaints against them. And what I thought was really interesting is they've launched programs like this in New Orleans and Denver and Washington, and they've found a lot of success with that. And it will be completely confidential, and it will be voluntary, and obviously people are going to be screened, but people are going to be screened to make sure that they're not like very hostile, because you want to make sure that it is going to be between two willing participants. But I think it's an awesome opportunity that's getting ready to happen, and I think it will do a lot, especially after everything that happened with Freddie Gray. I think this is just an awesome opportunity for a different way of handling problems. One of the things I thought was interesting in the article, it said that the police Department of Internal Affairs had investigated 799 cases in 2015, and only 13 cases were actually.
Wow.
So hopefully this will really help create, because there's a lot of obviously distrust between citizens and police, and I think this is a really awesome way to help manage that, or maybe reconcile that in a little bit. But I want to ask you all and the listeners, what are citizens most needing when they participate in dialogue with police, do you think?
I think the ability to be heard is so powerful and moving, because a lot of people feel like they just don't have a voice. And when they are voicing their concerns, there's no feedback. They just feel like it's going out into space. And for the ability to sit down in a mediation and really feel heard by the mediator and have the other side there too to really hear what's being said, I think is powerful, and it's a game changer.
Mhm.
When I was also reading that, and it was great to see that this mediation is going to be offered, and it really is going to take quite a bit of management for that to happen. My own personal experiences with police officers have been mixed since I was a teenager all the way, every time I get stopped for a speeding ticket or, whatever it is, and I've had, really good experiences. Even though I've had a speeding ticket, I've had officers who are extremely professional, very respectful, yes ma'am, and just very not discourteous. But I've also experienced what some of these other citizens who are making these complaints, who feel treated like dirt, feel like they, committed a crime. There's a lot of things that they feel very disrespected, that they're incivil, is it discourteous, and so, like you said, Tracy, they just want to be heard and understood about how that behavior impacted them. And so I'll be curious to see. I know both of y'all are up on the East Coast, and Abby, are you actually in the Baltimore area?
I'm actually in Baltimore City.
You're actually in the Baltimore area, and I know, Tracy, you work with a lot of courts out of Annapolis and stuff. So I'd be curious to see who kind of keeps statistics on how that's going and how satisfied that the citizens are in having that voice for themselves.
And I think after reading it, I think there's just a lot of preconceived ideas about each other. The police have their feelings about the citizens have their feelings about the police. So I think this will definitely help just breaking down those barriers a little bit, and maybe getting to know one another and getting to see the different perspectives from the other side. I think this is I'm really excited about this. I think this is an awesome opportunity for Baltimore City.
I agree. It's also nice, too, because this is a medium that will foster positive interactions with one another, and from there, you can only go up, right? So I do think this is going to be a really great opportunity for the city and for mediation and for the police community. Absolutely.
I'm wondering, you said that is this a trend that's happening, Abby, in terms of, you said that there are other states that have similar programs?
Yes. The article said that they've done similar programs in New Orleans, Denver, and Washington.
Okay.
So it could be working in other areas.
So it could be, maybe, listeners, you can, depending on where you are, especially in the United States, you could probably Google if you wanted to find out if something was available to you. You can probably, Google police plus mediation program. Sometimes the community mediation programs that are available in many, many states. If there was an issue with police, could be an option as well. But it's good to see that there's this trend, this intentional trend of rebuilding relationships with police officers, and so I'll be curious to see how this really goes. But I think the core message of all of that is everybody, when we're in conflict, wants to feel heard and understood, right? We don't want to get in, regardless of who's right or wrong, it doesn't matter, regardless of who, is telling the truth or the lie. A lot of times we get into this black and white language, right, which is just, spirals the conversation out of control. And just imagine, listeners, if you're in front of someone, whoever that is that you're in conflict with, remember how much you want to be heard and understood by that other person. They're going to want the same thing. And so one of the things I often will talk about is if you're in a heated conversation, first, you want to acknowledge or recognize, before you respond, you want to first recognize and acknowledge what is the person saying to you. You don't have to agree. You could just say, so what I'm hearing you say that's important to you is X, or I'm hearing you say that when X, Y, and Z happened, or when I did such and such, that it impacted you in this way. All you're simply doing is recognizing, validating, or acknowledging what they've said, right, without agreeing. And then if you are still unclear, you can ask a question to open up the conversation and then be able to state what your need is. Say, I was impacted, or I felt mistreated, or I believed I was being disrespected. So remember, first seek to hear and understand what the other person is saying without agreeing. Then you can start to explore what your own needs are. And I think that's essentially what this program, the mediation program, is that you were talking about, is a seek to be heard and understood and have this dialogue. So I think that's always going to be a message, don't you think? Because all of us are mediators or coaches, that's probably one of the number one needs that people have, is to be heard and understood.
Absolutely. Communication is the foundation of conflicts. At some point, there's a communication breakdown somewhere, and it escalates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you have to be willing to really give that space. When you said, Tracy, about go home and have that ice cream and then start thinking about what's my next move. Your next move could be, how do I have this conversation in a calm manner that allows the person to say what they need to say, even if you disagree with everything they're saying, and just really be present. Because the more resistant you are to them, the more resistant they'll be to you, and the more we want to push each other, right? One of the common principles around any kind of conflict negotiation is don't push. Don't resist. You really want to be able to have that conversation and really try hard to keep your mind open to what it is that they're saying without necessarily agreeing. So we're coming to a close on our program. Some really good conversations, and folks, on our Texas Conflict Coach, we have links to all of the current news. All of these were things that happened just within the last week or two, and so we do have links if you want to follow up to reading any of those articles. Before we do some closing stuff, Abby or Tracy, any other kind of closing thoughts that you have about what we talked about today?
No, I think all three of these articles were great, and I think it comes down to, it's really interesting because the last time we did this and this time, they all kind of have a similar thread through them. And I really like that this is about communication and acknowledgement, and I think that's really important. I think the tips you just gave will really help people in just everyday life with when it comes to conflict.
I agree. Communication is definitely a key in this, and I feel like as we move forward technology-wise, we are more instant, more immediate, but we're also further and further, we move away from one another in human interactions and conversations. So it's important to remember that we can go back to the basics, and instead of sending that email to your coworker, maybe pop up and go to their office and have a conversation, sit down for a little bit, and just disconnect every now and then to have those conversations.
Absolutely. Connect on a human level there, even though it might be a little bit scary. But you might be surprised, folks, when you actually do that the other person might be really receptive, and just pay attention to your own body language and attitude and approach when you do go into that office. So very good, guys. Great conversation tonight. Mm-hmm. So listeners, we have more. We have a lot of podcasts. I mean, we have over 270 podcasts in our podcast library, and you can download or listen to them at your convenience, either at the TexasConflictCoach.com or iTunes. If you're a big iTunes follower, we are on iTunes, and you can subscribe. All of it's free, and you will certainly learn and grow and about all areas of conflict. And we do encourage you to embrace conflict courageously and address it constructively. So until next time, good night, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you enjoyed the program. You can find all of our podcasts archived to listen at your convenience at texasconflictcoach.com or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. You can also become a Facebook fan of Conflict Connection or Twitter me at TX Conflict Coach.